Hello, my name is Lindsay Wargo, and I'm going to be discussing the class's third question, which is why educational and school psychologists are more likely to follow an ecological model rather than a medical model. So first, I'm going to discuss the history and emergence of the two perspectives, and then I will consider why psychologists today are much more likely to practice in line with an ecological model through examination of the disadvantage of a medical model versus the various advantages of an ecological model. According to Meta, during the 17th century, René Descartes developed a theory called Cartesian dualism, which portrays the view that mind and body are separate entities, each with a different nature. Descartes believes that the body was subject to mechanical laws, whereas the mind was not. Before this theory was established, the traditional Christian views, which suggested that humans were spiritual beings and body and soul were one, hindered the development of medical science. So diseases were believed to be caused by personal wrongdoings, and there was a religious prohibition on studying the anatomy through dissection due to the Christian belief that souls could not go to heaven unless the body was fully intact. In turn, Descartes developed mind and body dualism as a way for medical science to progress through the study of physiology and anatomy. The dualistic view of human nature led to the emergence of the biomedical model, which viewed humans as biological organisms which should be understood by examination through anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, and physics. Disease became viewed as a physical or chemical event. Intervention relied on implementation of a corrective physical or chemical agent, and health became synonymous with medicine. The medical model translated to the field of educational and school psychology in that the focus centered around assessment, diagnosis, and treatment of internal pathologies of students. So at that time, psychological dysfunction was attributed to internal biological pathologies. The profession relied solely on gathering information about psychopathology and internal states, which then guided their diagnosis and interventions. The medical model was severely challenged when diseases with psychological, social, and environmental aspects emerged, and issues reported by children began to rise. So, for example, Sheridan, 2000, reported statistics from this time frame, which include that a child commits suicide every 90 minutes, more than 3 million students are assaulted each year in schools, 1,500 students drop out of schools every day, etc. So this was clear evidence that the current model was very ineffective and schools were in desperate need of a fundamental change. According to Gutkin, 2012, Yuri Bonfinbrenner was credited with developing the most widely accepted perspective of ecological model. His view was centered around 4 related levels of the environment which continuously affect and are affected by the others. So changes in any level of the environment results in alteration throughout the entire system and impacts people and situations at every level. Bronfenbrenner viewed human behavior as a function of a complex interaction between characteristics of individuals and the environment in which they function. The ecological model entails 4 assumptions, which include that each child is an inseparable part of a social system, disturbance is a lack of balance in the system rather than a disease located in the body, discordance is a discrepancy between an individual's ability and the demands of the environment, and any intervention is intended to make the system work. Educational and school psychologists began to place emphasis on information regarding teachers, classroom environment, parents, home environment, and communities in which the child is surrounded. As psychologists began to understand how dysfunction relates to the larger systems that students live among, they were able to develop strategies and interventions that were significantly more effective. Watson, 2011, discusses various strategies that were implemented in schools to reflect this ecological thinking. As school psychology moved away from traditional practices, response to intervention, or RTI, was adopted to focus on prevention and early intervention and provide students with research-based instruction through a multi-tiered approach. Eco-behavioral assessments were also implemented as a model that assesses classroom variables and the potential relationships with effective instruction. EBA collects data on ecological variables, teacher behavior, and student behavior every minute in order to provide a subsequent picture of the relationship between environmental and instructional factors and the student's opportunity to respond. Functional assessment of academic behavior, FAAB, were also used as a means to explain the relationship between behavior and the environmental events that predict the occurrence and non-occurrence of a behavior. So now that we have a better understanding of the history behind these two perspectives, I'm going to discuss the many reasons why educational and school psychologists are more likely to utilize an ecological approach. Although it's very evident that the ecological model is much more effective than the medical model, I'm going to touch on specific disadvantages of the medical model, followed by advantages of the ecological model. So by focusing solely on the child and pathology-related aspects, the medical model is too restrictive and leads school psychologists to asking and answering the wrong types of questions. Because the model examines individuals rather than populations, it's impossible to solve widespread issues in schools, and it actually discourages the use of interventions that are most needed. The failure to recognize the role of the environment in psychoeducational issues leads to only temporary solutions that often reoccur when the child is placed back into the unchanged environment. Another downfall is that the model focuses on remediation rather than prevention and early intervention. So although research suggests that prevention and early intervention methods are highly effective, the medical model waits to intervene until a full-blown issue is present. So due to the lack of emphasis on prevention and early intervention, it's especially important that the treatments are highly effective once they're implemented. But unfortunately, this is not typically the case with medical model interventions, and in fact, meta-analysis indicates that the medical model interventions produce medium effect size at best. These strategies also have questionable reliability and validity in diagnosing IDEA and DSM disabilities, which indicates that there is a disconnect between information gathered for diagnosis and information needed for effective treatment. Gutkin argues that the model creates a shortage of service providers by attributing psychological dysfunction to internal biological pathologies that require doctors to provide treatment. Not only is there an insufficient number of doctors to meet the needs of all students who require mental health care, but also there's evidence to suggest that a doctoral degree is not necessary in order to provide these services. The model's lack of involvement and cooperation with parents, teachers, and other relevant adults makes it extremely difficult to make differences in the lives of young people. So this deficit is very significant because there are many ways in which the lack of relationship between the intervention team and other relevant adults can negatively influence the program design, implementation, and outcome. On the other hand, the ecological model assesses a variety of environmental aspects, which results in a more accurate picture of student behavior and an increased range of treatments and interventions. Directing attention to classrooms, schools, home, and community environments allows school psychologists to impact a significant amount of students at one time. The model allows practitioners to develop interventions that address universal, selective, or indicative populations depending on the situation. Because ecological-based services target the alteration of school, home, and community environments, they alleviate not only the issues of a specific student, but they also help to prevent the problem from reoccurring in any other student. This perspective also creates opportunities to provide prevention and early intervention services due to the allowance of implementing empirically validated teaching methods or modifications in curriculum before the problems arise or following early signs of difficulty. Another advantage is that the ecological model is much more internally consistent in the way that it focuses on gathering diagnostic data that is directly related to treatment implementation. So this has resulted in much more effective interventions, and the use of RTI has diminished issues of reliability and validity in diagnosis. The model encourages the development of strong working relationships with schools, families, and communities, which in turn empowers everyone to contribute to prevention, early intervention, and remediation. So this inclusion results in a dramatic increase of service providers because everyone is invested in the implementation and outcomes of the interventions. So these research findings are all very important aspects of why an ecological model is so much more appropriate, effective, and ethical than a medical model. The ecological perspective addresses and corrects nearly every downfall of the traditional perspective. As stated by Sheridan, 2000, an ecological theory holds the greatest potential as an effective school psychological service delivery orientation. And although the medical model still exists today, the ecological model has gained wide popularity among a variety of professions and has played a significant role in the advances and increased influence of educational and school psychology. Thank you.